Hello everyone, welcome to the Plutus IS. Today we are going to talk about one of the topic of the geology optional paper and of course optional paper 2. So here in one of the topic is the biogenetic law. If you see your PYQs, of course you will see this question has been came repeatedly. So now we'll talk about what are the assumptions, what are the problems, what is actually the biogenetic law. Okay. So this law is actually also known as a ontogeny recapitulates the phylogeny. Okay, of course, gradually we'll talk every aspect of that biogenetic law. So biogenetic law is the theory of the development. Of course, that means it is one of the topic of your unit evolution. Okay, so when we talk about the evolution, we talk about the different evidences of the evolution. Okay, so actually we can say the dividation, the mainly two categories or the dividation is of the evolution is the direct evidence and the indirect evidence. Okay, so evolutionary evidence में आपका जो biogenetic law है, it comes into that indirect evidence. In the direct evidence, we generally talk about the paleontology or the fossil studies. Okay, so in that biogenetic law, it is a theory of the development and evolution that is proposed by the Ernst Haeckel. Okay, Ernst Haeckel, which was a scientist in the Germany, and this law is proposed in your 1860s, almost around 1865. Okay, be specific. If it is one of the several recapitulation theory. Of course, we'll talk about that. So when we say that recapitulation, that means repetition or the revision. Okay, recapitulation theory which posit that stages of the development for an animal embryo. Don't worry if the concept is a little bit difficult starting. I'll just conclude and last everything. Okay, simple. It says the development of animal embryo, that means it's a developmental stage during in the womb stage. Okay, are the same as other animals adult stages or forms. Okay, so what does that mean? Because this law actually talks about the evolution. So for the sake of that, if I am saying that human ka embryo, the embryo of the human की जो developing stage होगी, that means development of the heart, development of the limbs, development of the lungs and so many things, that will be okay. So development of the animal embryo are same as the animal's adult stage of the forms. Okay, commonly stated that ontogeny recapitulates the phylogeny. The biogenetic law theorizes that stages an animal embryo undergoes during development are a chronological replay. That is the word it is defining, that recapitulates. Okay, replay of that species past evolutionary forms. Okay, so sorry, here we're talking about that. Suppose that if we talk about the human, so we know that human and birds are evolved from that reptiles. Okay, so that means its developmental stage of the human's embryo will be resembling with the adult stage or some stages of the reptiles. That shows that evolutionary linkage of the human. Of course, not only this, there are so many other evidences also, but according to the biogenetic law, the developmental stage of the embryo, okay, of the human embryo, it shows the similarity of the reptiles stages. Okay, fine. Of that species past evolutionary forms. The biogenetic law states that each embryo's developmental stage represent an adult form of the evolutionary ancestor. So reptiles ka jo adult form of ancestor. So of course, if you want to just connect it with the example. So when we talk about that animal kingdom, chordate and non-chordate. So when we talk about the chordates, have three major functions. Okay, so the presence of the notochord, the nerve cord, and the, of course there's five, but if we be more specific, then the third point is the pharyngeal gill slits. If we talk about that, humans are chordate, and of course fishes are also chordates. Sorry, fishes are also chordates. That means the developmental of the human embryo is actually resemblance with the development of the gill slits that is present in the adult form of that fishes. Okay, so that is something we are talking about. Then Haeckel proposed the biogenetic law after reading the Charles Darwin's theories in the origin of species. ठीक है, उनके थ्रू उनका conclusion था. Haeckel proposed the biogenetic law so that the researchers could use the stages of the embryological development to help construct evolutionary, that is your phylogenetics. In that word, when we are saying, just a minute guys, in that word when we are saying that ontogeny recapitulates the phylogeny. Ontogeny is the individual development, phylogeny is the evolutionary link. Okay, so that is here we're talking about that help construct the evolutionary, the phylogenetic trees. Haeckel also claimed that the phylogenesis or the process by which the groups of organisms diversify. So here we also know the concept of the cladogenesis and the anagenesis. This is also one of the topic of systematics also. Okay, so that means yahan see this origin of this ancestor is this. From here the different or level of the species are forming or the emerging. Okay, so Haeckel also claimed that phylogenesis or the evolutionary or the process by which the groups of organisms diversify, this was diversifying from one another, influenced the development of the ontogeny. So this is your law. Jahan say there's a the point where these new species are diversifying, that actually influence the development of the ontogeny, that means individual embryo, okay, of the embryo. Sorry. He theorized that stages in an organism's ontogeny, of course embryonic development, reflected the successive changes in form and from generation to generation. Suppose that if we talk about, even if we talk about the human evolution, okay, so in that human evolution, the different types of human, such as your Ramapithecus, Diopithecus, then Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, so many types of. So when suppose that from the Ramapithecus a new human has been formed, so in that adult stages of the human, next stage, suppose that if we talk about the Homo erectus, so Homo erectus have some kind of similarities which will have in the Ramapithecus, right? Because they are showing that diversification, but having the similar in origin, or better say the human or the chimpanzees, right? So that's showing the changes from the generation to generation. So from that Homo erectus, if the Homo sapiens is forming, so it is not in the quick. So gradually the changes occurred, and that's sustained in the generation to generation. Okay, of the organism's evolutionary ancestors. Of course, many scientists saw Haeckel's work as a breakthrough in the recapitulation theory, because he offered a physical mechanism of the development that other biologists had not proposed. Okay, so here everything we can see here. Okay, so here we can see this is your different types of adult. Okay, just a minute guys. So here this is a fish ka embryo, the salamander, this is a salamander. So salamander and fish, and here the tetrapoda, then chick, then calf, babies and human. So we can see there is a gradual changes even in the embryonic development, but they have the similarity. If you see the fish ka embryo and the salamander ka embryo, hai na, they are showing the similarity. That is talking about the biogenetic law, that even the adult of that, like suppose that if we're talking this is the adult, this adult is showing the similarities at the embryonic developmental of the ancestor stage. Okay, what are the assumption? Actually this is given the Haeckel to propose this, to just establish this theory, he gave the three assumptions. The first is the law of correspondence, the second is the constraints in the early development, and the third one is a law of truncation. We'll talk one by one. So what is the law of correspondence? This states that, again just listen carefully, that okay, this states that each stage of the development in the higher animals such as humans correspond to the adult stage of the lower animal. So that we already have talked about, that stages of the development, that is embryonic development, is resembling or corresponding the adult stage of the lower animal, such as your gill slits. Example, for instance, gill slits in the early human correspond to the gill slits in the adult fish. That is simple, the law of corresponding. Okay, second is the constraints in the early development. The second assumption of the biogenetic law was that phylogenesis, evolutionary history, must occur by the addition of the new characters at the end of the normal developmental process. So here if we talk about, if we want to establish this statement, so what it says, that whatever the changes are occurring, initially the both embryo are look alike, right? Here in the fish or the salamander or any other one, suppose that this. So whatever the changes has occurred from, suppose that the chick or the human embryo, that changes actually added at the end of the development. That means initial embryonic development was similar. Suppose that if we talk about, if we want to just justify with the help of the example, so initially there was a development of the, for sure, the gills, or better example is like that frog ka jo tadpole larva, the tadpole larva of the frog, it has a similarity with the fish early embryonic development or the adult also, है ना. So when we talk about that, what is the difference between the tadpole larva and the adult frog? The development of the limbs. So that development, that particular change from that fishes to the amphibians, it is added in the later stages of development, right? So that's what we are talking about in that second loss, that is a constraints in the early development. The second assumption says that the addition of the new characters to the end of the normal development process. Haeckel said that early stages of the different species embryos look similar to each other. We have just said, you know, early stages are look similar. If you want to see any other, okay, look similar to each other because of the developmental जो constraints होते हैं present early in the development, okay, and these constraints disappear towards the end of the development, and that's how the changes occur. That changes added in the later stages of the development. That is shows that constraints in the कोई भी नया development, if there will be talk about the new development, that new development will not be in that early stage of the development. That's why the embryo is almost similar of all the animals. If we talk about the chordates, right, the changes occurred in this. That's why to form the new species. Okay, so that means to form the new species, the constraints in the early development because changes added in the later stage of the development. Got it? Okay, so which allow the addition of the new character and for the subsequent evolution. Third is your principle of truncation. What it states, the third assumption was the principle of the truncation. Haeckel argued that if the new characters were continuously added to the end of the normal ontogeny, that means embryonic development, agar if the new character, suppose the development of limb, development of lungs, whatever you want to understand, as end of the normal ontogeny, the length of the embryonic development would eventually become the longer than the gestation period of organism in extant species. This is a very well established thing, right? So suppose that if we want to consider the gestation period of the fishes or the gestation period of the amphibians, of course, comparatively, if we talk about the on an average, so comparatively the gestation period of the amphibians is larger, है ना, compared to your fishes. Why? Because there's a development of the, suppose that if we talk about the human has a 9 months of gestation period, right, compared to your chicks or compared to the other small reptiles, okay, because whatever the new addition of the changes occurred, that occurred in the later development, and because of that continuous addition of the development, continuous addition of the new character in the later stage of the development, the gestation period become enlarges compared to their evolutionary extent, like past species, you know, compared to your fish, amphibians, human, like so many other species, you know, because new characters are adding, and that is stretching the gestation period. And the new addition, like if you talk about the human embryo, early embryo is simple, like zygote and developmental stage, morula, blastula, gastrula, and this and that. Then the development of the lungs, then hearts, then limb, then so many complex organism, right, the brain and so many things. That because of that addition of the new character is taking the longer duration, and that is called as a truncation. Trunk like increasing, like length. Okay, okay, in the early stage of development must be faster. So as a result, he theorized that early stages of the development must be faster. Truncation मतलब early stages जो होंगे वो shorter होंगे, है ना. जैसे कि अगर if we talk in a very formal way, तो 2 to 3 months are very faster क्योंकि उसमें आपकी resemblance है, almost similar, ठीक है. That's why if you talk about the human embryo, आपकी 3 month or 4 months से almost structure form हो जाता है, right. So addition जो होते हैं वो आपके later stage में आते हैं. Because of that, early stages become constrained and the later stage become lengthen up, है ना. So that is a early organism that in the lower ones. Haeckel also used the concept of truncation to explain the inconsistence between that the stages of the animal, okay, from different taxa. For instance, pigs and humans may look similar to each other as the early embryos. Okay, so but some of the scientists also reject this theory for sure. What are the rejections of this theory? Okay, so this is some of the rejections of this theory. So first is that actually embryos of the higher animals resemble only the embryos of the lower animals and not the adults. This was the first rejection because Haeckel stated in his biogenetic laws that the stages of the development of the adult evolved species has a resemblance with that embryonic development of the past or the extant species. That is something. तो यहाँ पे क्या, then ontogeny only shows the affinities, not the evolution. ठीक है, ontogeny केवल resemblance show करती है. Where is the evolution? Who will talk about the evolution? That is your second thing. And third one is retaining ancestral embryonic stage has no selection value and therefore would be wasteful and time consuming. ठीक है, अगर आप कह रहे हो कि ancestral embryo stage ठीक है, अगर वो हो रहा है तो हमेशा evolution जो है, in that evolution natural selection favors the most good or the most suitable character for the better survival, something like that, है ना, जो कि जिसका efficient हो, energy efficient हो, time consuming हो, reproductive capacity हो. So if you are saying that retaining ancestral embryonic stage has no selection value, therefore it would be the wasteful, right, and the time consuming, because changes, if the changes of the evolution of the species is adding in the later stages, so initial वाली जो है वो तो wasteful है, right? That is, should not be like that, because this should not be following the exact natural selection theory. But biogenetic law was accepted one. Why? Modern gene theory explains that sequence of the events, and that sequence of the event that we're talking about, the embryonic developmental stage. Okay, so sequence of events and the subsequent end product of the ontogeny in the right perspective, and therefore Haeckel's original theory has now been rejected. So when the rejection has occurred, so he believed that the paleogenetic characters, okay, paleogenetic characters are ancestral traits that are retained. So when they actually talk about the retaining characters of that, so they said ki only those characters which are the paleogenetical evidence, only those are the ancestors that are retaining the embryos, है ना? And xenogenetic characters are secondary, adaptive, and non-ancestral that appear later during the development. On the basis of that, some of the scientists, of course, discarded his theory about on the basis of that embryos of the lower animal ontogeny shows affinity on agar changes, if the good or the evolution of the species changes occur in the later development, then the early development is a wasteful. So there were some of the theories, but when the gene or the gene concept came, so they actually talked about okay, so there's a gradual changes which yes actually occurs in the embryo or the genetic level or something like that. So this is your biogenetic laws, actually your indirect evidence. Biogenetic laws is actually your indirect evidence of the evolution, and that actually gives the one of the evidence of the evolution which occurred at the embryonic stages. Okay, so this is one of your PYQ. So almost all of the content I have already written there, so it is, you can consider as a complete PDF for the biogenetic law. Thank you everyone.